The finale is in this one, and believe me, this is the epic part. Well, it certainly felt that way when I went through this. On the third floor, they saw hills of corpses, with the golden bar on top of one of them. Death being their ideal, as the Inquisitors were raising their arms in unison, as if to worship something, with Chroma standing on the highest peak, holding out her hands in a prayer-like gesture towards the golden bar on top of the altar. Faust noted that the fathoms of the ego was already open. Someone had resonated with the bar before them. Yeah, someone whose insanity was reflected by this disturbing imagery. Gregor didn't understand what they were raising their hands for. Faust simply stated, prayer. Ishmael asking what that sound was. It was awfully familiar to Heathcliff. Tingly and unpleasant. Then Gregor noted that it was a school bell. Sinclair hated it that much. This lightened the mood for the damned dozen. Well, except for Sinclair, as the golden bar should have resonated with his mind. He showed unease. He didn't want to be shown the memories leading up to his greatest mistake and the consequences. Or another way of putting it is the highlight reel of his actions. Sadly, that's something that he had no power to control. Meanwhile, Chroma told her faithful to listen up, and the other two beside her said what she said. The one who grips declares. The one who grips declares. Then she told them that not only are those heretics disturbing their sacred sites, they are now after the offering that is rightfully theirs to consecrate. Then the two Inquisitors said, disgraceful and defiled are they. Disgraceful and defiled are they. She told them to go forth and die. Do not fear the end, because as long as the offering of gold is with them, they shall be brought back to life again and again. Then the two Inquisitors did what they do best, and said, we shall fear not, for the one who grips is with us. We shall fear not, for the one who grips is with us. Then she drew her attention to Sinclair, telling him to hurry up as she sees him as belonging in her hands. Then the Inquisitors said, no greater joy exists than to be wielded by the one who grips. No greater joy exists than to be wielded by the one who grips. Sinclair was not positively affected by this. Chroma then asked if he brought the coin. Now this is a case where religion is being used as an excuse for violence, cruelty, and insanity. It's like the massacre of Béziers during the Albigensian Crusade in France around 1209. When asked how they are to distinguish between the Catholic majority and the comparatively few that were the rival Christian sect known as the Cathars, among the population of Béziers, Abbot und Amaurik said, Caedat eos novit enim dominus qui sunt eos, which roughly translated means, kill them all, that God saw them out. Yeah, this is a real-life example of religion being used as an excuse for violence. or actions in general that are questionable at best and just wrong at worst, where it's a matter of seeing things entirely in black and white, such as, these are the villains, we're the heroes. Such a comfort, isn't it? Chroma wants them to throw their lives away, when in reality, she doesn't give a about any of them. As long as the objective is achieved, nothing else matters. And what she wants to achieve, it'll likely be around the same lines as Argalia, the Blue Sicko. Or nothing good. Then Sinclair was forced to experience his past in a school within Carl, which had a gender-neutral idea about the uniforms. It all seemed so peaceful and stable, breaks between classes always being where everyone gathers around to talk. The adults watching this from afar would see this as heartwarming, although they didn't realize. These interactions were filled with a mix of envy, vainglory, pride, and guile. It was truly a treacherous place, if you think about it. Children were crafty. One such conversation involved a classmate speaking of Rahul from the next class getting surgery on both arms by his father with new tech not shown before. Another classmate mentioned an actor that's on all the magazine covers getting a new eye at their mother's clinic, which had a long waiting list. Apparently this actor begged to be moved up. I suspect that she was paid a sizable amount of for that to happen. Sinclair's anxiety increased with each boastful story, making him think about what he should share, as expecting eyes can be turned into scoffing leers at any moment. Afraid of what could be considered social death, he mentioned something that he shouldn't. This was a secret. His dad signed a contract with P-Corp, seeing the technology that he was working on, and gave him their full support. So a wing from all the way over at District 16 was interested. That's not something to look at and go meh at. In hindsight, he believed that his fear of ostracization, I still struggle with English. Well, it spelled his own ruin. He remembered what his dad said. Now, Emil, this is a confidential agreement for our business. You mustn't tell another soul. Let us just say that legal action would be the least of Sinclair's problems, based on what happened later. But at this point, this impressed his classmates greatly. His father making a deal with a wing? His depraved craving for attention was what drove him. Then one classmate mentioned that his prosthetic procedure was soon. He confirmed this as he was getting the newest model. They didn't notice this, but he was reluctant to make the one-way transition to a synthetic body. After the break was over, he felt a wave of guilt crash into him. He was finally left alone. He was afraid of his father finding this out. He noticed blood was leaking from his fingertip, due to a bad habit of biting his nails whenever anxiety was taking over. It ended up hurting him. Even clipping them as short as possible didn't work, as he bit into his skin. Yes, he bit into his skin, which caused bleeding. Then he thought of something. He'll get a prosthetic replacement after graduation, and he'll never get hurt or see his blood again. But he was questioning this. Then he first met Chroma, who noticed that he was bleeding. She then went up to his face. She was a classmate that she rarely... well, let's just say he rarely talked to her. He barely remembered her name. He responded awkwardly, asking what was that. Asking if what he said earlier was legit. Sinclair confirmed this, Chroma believing that his father is the real deal, and Sinclair agreed with that, feeling embarrassed, as if his father's greatness was somehow his own. She then noted, why he made that face. Sinclair was surprised by this. She then said that he was thinking it to himself, whispering in his ear that, "It's filthy." His eyes widened, surprised that she somehow knew what he was thinking, that she was somehow able to figure out what he was hiding, asking how she knew. Sinclair, she's a functional psychopath. They know what buttons to push. It's what they do. And they don't care how many lives they destroy, as long as it achieves what they set out to do. As for how Chroma knew, well, she was certainly able to continue with gaining his confidence, as she didn't deny her accusations. It was because she agreed with him on that, and this surprised him. Apparently, it was because she was on the same wavelength as him. She introduced herself as Chroma. Since then, Chroma and he became friends who would talk often. Although I suspect that it was only you who saw her as a friend, Sinclair. As psychopaths have no friends, only allies, acquaintances, or discardable assets. As friends imply, well, that implies that they care about others. As the damned dozen fought through the Inquisitors, Sinclair remembered his family, his parents and his sister. As a household rule, they used to have breakfast at the same table every morning, a pleasant time when the whole family would share stories and encouraging words. He liked those mornings. It was an unnatural and unchanging world that belonged to him, his world. Then that world began to feel alienating one day, as their organic bodies, with plates of food and glasses of drinks, were replaced with prosthetic bodies with power lines connected to them to recharge them. It was the day when his sister had her body replaced, and her prosthetic transformation was complete. It changed when his father's head was replaced with one of steel, circuits and wires. Breakfast no longer had warmth and connection. It became one of detachment, where he talked less and less, which resulted in an inherent abhorrence for prostheses. Well, prostheses, yes. Seeing it as filthy. He couldn't accept the idea of replacing his organic body with something else, never mind the need for it. Why use that kind of body? He asked this once and was given a simple reply. That unmodified, the human body is too old-fashioned. It needs food for sustenance, revitalized by sleep, lest it fall from fatigue, and injuries take a long time to heal. It makes the human body incredibly inefficient. He concluded that prostheses would grow more commonplace as time goes on and ultimately become a regular part in daily lives. I can see a few flaws in that explanation. For a start, food isn't just a substance. There's also flavour to consider. He didn't consider that, did he? He's also focused on the pain aspect. There are also pleasures, such as those of the flesh. There are those that see exercise as a recreational activity, something not needed in an artificial body. Things like alcohol, caffeine, and nicotine. Okay, the first and third one rather, I honestly can't say I care for them. But I do have caffeine occasionally, something to help my brain reboot at the start of the day. Then there's the question of where children will come from. If the whole population is essentially neutered and just brains in artificial bodies, well, this is likely part of why some feel uneasy about prostheses. Sinclair thought, if that's what mainstream will be, I prefer to fall behind the times. It wasn't an argument rooted in logic, but then again, relying entirely on logic has brought many a disaster, as it might be considered logical to commit genocide to maintain order. But it isn't a moral action. Then at one point after their first meeting, Chroma asked if Sinclair really wants to take the replacement procedure. He nodded without a word. Chroma understood that his parents wouldn't like it if he confessed that he saw it as filthy, and that it was frustrating that he could do nothing about it. He nodded again at this. Chroma asked if she could help him out, so that he could live a freer life with no worries about being in a synthetic body. Sinclair asked how that was possible. She told him that he'll find out next time. In exchange for helping him out with his problem, he'll need to help her deal with a grudge of her own. Yeah, it's that kind of deal, where Sinclair will certainly get what he wants, but not without a huge price that will involve him being screwed over. Okay, let's continue the background story. As more Inquisitors were taken down, Sinclair remembered the day when a new transfer student called Demian was placed in the class next to his, surrounded by a crowd every time he saw him. Sinclair didn't feel that he felt attached to any of them. He seemed to be floating in the air as if he was aloof. He didn't seem too interested in Sinclair either. He felt that way at first. Then it happened. During a boring engineering class, his attention drifted from the board and he was looking out the window, seeing Demian take a walk, wearing a faint smile as he was walking with his fellow students. His expression was different from others his age. It had a mature yet solitary aura, basking in the sunlight. He stroked his hair. It surprised him when he saw a red thing on his forehead, a sign. Then it was gone, making Sinclair question if it was the sunlight reflecting off his skin. He had a feeling that Demian made eye contact with him. Some were chatting outside, and he looked away the moment he felt Demian's gaze, and then looked down on his desk. Since then, Demian went to talk to him in a friendly manner. Oddly enough, Chroma was nowhere to be seen when that happened. Regardless, whenever she did come, she made sure that he remembered their promise. Then one day, Demian said to Sinclair that he often had this dream. In that dream, he climbed an endless ladder. Everything below came into view. The nest, the back streets, the outskirts, all of it. Then all the lights were out in the city, as if the end of all things had come. Are you sure the end of all things hasn't already arrived long ago? And this is what it created. In that vision, the city had fallen into silent death, empty of any motion, the state of death itself. Sinclair asked if he had been to the outskirts, which was a place that no one could or should go, at least under normal circumstances. Demian didn't see places as divided as where you should and shouldn't go, asking if love and freedom can be found within the confines of the nest. Compared to there, life was much richer in the outskirts. Well, it's usually outside of the head's interest, so those outside are freer if they're willing to put up with the constant risk of being killed by the countless experiments left to rot/rust and the ever-present possibility of starving to death. There was something that Demian was pondering for a long time. That's it, where he should find the answer. Whenever Sinclair talked to Demian, he felt his soul mature a little, but he didn't speak of his fears about the upcoming prosthetic procedure, or his relationship with Chroma, even though he wanted to know more about Demian. He was hesitant to share his secrets. He was too ashamed to bear his hidden fears before him. And finally, that day came. Chroma asked him to show her his basement. Her words struck him. Yes, they were light as a feather. It was spoken as if it was for something like picking up an eraser, almost catching himself agreeing to it, asking why his family's basement. Apparently she's heard a rumor that, if it's right, his house was connected to a scandalous place. She wanted to check if it's true. Sinclair was afraid that his parents would find out about that, but he didn't say that in a complete sentence. She said that if he lets her check that out, she'll keep her promise that he won't have to have his body replaced. Just sneak the basement key, and she'll navigate the rest. He slowly nodded to this. The beginning of the world of evil. Right there in the middle of his family's house. The damned dozen were slowly fighting to where Chroma was, but during this, Sinclair remembered stealing the key without his parents noticing, taking Chroma to the basement of his estate as promised. She led him to a dry air vent. They crawled into the unlit vent for a while. It had a dank, grimy odor, and he heard the sounds of small critters scuttling about. His clothes were stained with filth. His throat parched, and he had a desire to go back. Then he found the source of the smell. It had changed. Chroma asked if he could feel it. There was something up ahead. This was his last chance to turn back. He could have said that they should leave and come back later. It might have been better, but he knew that it would have been pointless to try that with her. A vile curiosity came to him. Before he could even try, entering a world where villains belonged for the first time, and for some reason, he refused to turn back. knowing that he was throwing away his last chance to do so. It was a loathsome sight that he had to witness. He couldn't think to behold twice. He likely saw some abnormalities through that vent, as monstrosity was a description that didn't fit. What he saw was too sentient for that, but it wasn't remotely human. He shuddered in fear at this sight. He regretted stepping into this world, regretting not turning back when he had the chance. Then he saw he would be unable to forget this until the day he died. Not knowing about the contract that he'd make with Dante much later than that. He begged Chroma that he wanted to go back. Sadly, Chroma was enraptured by what she was seeing, being psychotic even then. So she stayed a while. Quite a different reaction to his. She was mesmerized by this, watching intently as though she made a discovery of a lifetime, while he crawled back. Why was this basement connected to such a horrid place? How did Chroma know about this? Why didn't it scare her? Her spine-chilling whistles with the wind from behind could almost be heard. The very next day, she came to school as if nothing happened. She thanked him for showing her precious things. She gave him 2 coins as thanks, telling him to always keep them at his side. He nodded. Since then, what he saw haunted his mind. He began to consciously avoid Chroma. Why is this decision you've made at this point? Involuntarily feeling terror just by looking at her. Then he remembered the basement key, worried that all it would take is for someone to sort through the keys to find out. Feeling that he betrayed his parents living in a world of warmth, worrying that a deviation from that world was become an irrefutable fact. He then asked for the key back from her. This made her burst out with laughter, as though she didn't expect this, which was intimidating to Sinclair. She was apparently wondering what he was struggling to say. She handed it back. She didn't need it anymore, and besides, his grudge will certainly bear fruit. He doesn't want to get his procedure, right? Asking if he remembered his promise. He helps fulfill her grudge, so it's only fair that she pays him back. He was so relieved to get the key back. He wasn't paying much attention to what Chroma was saying. He cursed his ignorance for that, especially what she meant by saying that we don't need it anymore, along with why she didn't need it anymore or how she was going to fulfill his grudge. He didn't ask questions, and for that he regrets his inaction and curses his foolishness. He was easily swayed by others. His will was weak. It left him vulnerable to the manipulations of others. The climb wasn't getting any easier. Yes, the reminder of his feelings continues as Sinclair remembered talking to Demian. He said that he ended up giving Chroma the key. Sinclair was surprised that he knew that. Demian apparently had the ability to get a grip on things that was never mentioned to him. Apparently learned by casually observing others. He didn't elaborate further on that. He told Sinclair that a series of much more painful events may await him in the future, but he mustn't give up. The pain will foster growth into a beautiful being. As perplexing as this sounds, His mystic charm made it sound convincing. It gave Sinclair hope that he could really grow to become a worthy being. Sinclair made it clear that he didn't get it. Demian told him that it was up to him to find out, telling him to make sure to tell him the answer when he does. This soft, pleasant voice made him feel compelled to do as he said. It had power. It also disarmed those that made eye contact with him, sapping them of mental strength. But if that's the case, why didn't he warn him? He still asks himself this to this day. As the damned dozen got close to the top, Sinclair remembered that day. It was Christmas Eve. The whole town was filled with jingles and joy. It was this day that he was planning to confess his sin to his family, that he made the foolish mistake of stealing the basement key, and that he'd go back to being a good son. That the short time away from the right path was agonizing. He learned how peaceful and fulfilling that he'd been living previously truly was. He expected his family to be surprised at first, but willing to welcome him back into their paradise. However, we know what happened. He was expecting his robot dog to greet him at the gates, but all was silent and dark. When he walked inside, he was confronted with a fallen paradise. His sister told him to run, as she was attacked by the hammer and nail, specifically a large man in silver armor, with Chroma, even then, a part of this. Where she was ripping the head off his father in a mess of gory wires and brain matter. Ooh, yeah, she went full Mortal Kombat on him. And the large man was, of course, Guido, who said how unsightly of those false humans to still admire humanity and display false emotion. Chroma told him to leave them be, it's their survival instincts kicking in. She laughed after saying that they're scared to shut down. Pieces of metal, flesh and blood were flying into the air before hitting the ground. Then she noticed Sinclair, who was watching in horror, understanding what she meant by him not undergoing the procedure. He wasn't expecting that to take the form of them killing his family so they won't force him to undergo the procedure. Chroma then approached Sinclair, who was on the floor, clearly traumatized by this. She was carrying a hammer stained with blood and flesh. She was raised to not stand being involved with filthy affronts to humanity, like prosthetics, because she's a humanitarian who loves all things human, which would fit with what N-Corp is about, although it doesn't explain the suicide vending machine that's apparently popular, according to Leviathan, the prequel story to Limbus Company. Asking how it felt to face the son of a pack of those affronts to humanity, asking what she should do with him. He was psychologically helpless due to all that was happening. He didn't dare look up. Terror was too strong, and the realization that she was close to him. She said, well, we'll get to that. He closed his eyes, kept them shut, expecting the worst, expecting the hammer to strike him. He opened his eyes, confused by what didn't happen. Then he saw that Chroma was watching him with a psychotic smirk, like the one that she made at their first meeting. She saw him as her hero. He took out one of the 2 coins that she gave him, saying that from now on he'll doubt everything, be anxious of everything, and be in an ever-constant terror as his memories of her haunts him, and when the time comes, she'll call for him. It looks like she's a gender-bent scarecrow instead, if he received a non-lethal dose of Joker toxin. She's certainly big on terror tactics as well as being psychotic. She then ordered someone to take him to safety, vowing to make them regret it if they lay a finger on him. Guido understood and carried him as he fell unconscious. The top was ever closer, and then Sinclair remembered what happened when he regained consciousness. In an alleyway at midday. It was likely Christmas Day, which was cold, even though the alleyway was heated by the midday sun. He was on the ground, dazed and confused, the haze rising from the surface, his life ruined in that one day. Well, it'd certainly be one twisted Batman origin story, that's for sure. Then Damien appeared. There's something more to him. If he knew where Sinclair would be, telling him that a crack had been made in this world. Sinclair was starting to understand the strange feeling that he felt when around him, how he could never hear his footsteps, a desolate silence as if he didn't belong there. The loss of his family, the world of evil, all that despair and him. Damien asked if he was scared. He had the look of someone that could see all of that coming. He also knew what he was going to say, saying that one day he'll break it together, all together, and soar, wishing to see him completely bare, responding as if he knew how he'd answer. His words seemed to radiate warmth. He also felt a chill, like biting into the cold insides of a half-cooked turkey. Then he fell unconscious again. It's likely that sometime after that he was found and recruited by Limbus Company. Then they finally got to the top, and Chroma asked him if he was able to find an answer in his heart's path. He was filled with anger, barely able to respond. Amused by this, she told him not to give him that look. It's not even time yet. He's making her want to kill him. Well, he certainly wants to kill you. She decided to abstain from that, as immediate entertainment would distract her from the more important things. Then Faust reminded Sinclair that the only way to retrieve a golden bar that's begun to resonate is... He stopped her mid-explanation. He knew, even if it wasn't for their mission, he'd tear that to pieces and drink up her remains. Yeah, we get it. This one is personal. This was greatly amusing to Chroma, asking where he'd learned to act so tough. It's not like him at all, considering it a riot. Oh, I don't know, perhaps the fact that you first killed his family, left him with PTSD, and then killed his entire town while burning it to the ground? Did you not think that he'd not... Well, sorry, let's start that again. Did you think that he'd not be vengeful towards you after that? Then she noted that he'd made some friends since then, asking if he'll not run away this time. Then the damned dozen fought Chroma, who was significantly more powerful than she appeared, more so than even Guido. She was able to hold her own against their combined might. Some were fatigued, some were damaged, some were even dead. Cromer still standing triumphantly. She then reached to the inside of Sinclair's coat in what seems like a declaration of his fate, saying that it was time for Sinclair. She will be taking the second coin, his last chance. He then asked why was she doing this to him? Why him? She then asked him why did she give him back the basement key when he asked. It wasn't because she'd made her discovery or made a copy of it. It was because he was her key. She had the ability to see multiple futures. Much as Iori, the Purple Tear, had the ability to travel to other universes. In one of these futures, she saw one where they travelled from nest to nest, slaughtering heretics together all around the city. Even though he was raised by heretics, bearing revolting metal bodies, part of him still felt disgusted by them. He would stab them in the head with his halberd. Sinclair told her not to lie to him. She continued to state that she'd smash their heads with her hammer. He shouted at her to stop it. She continued that by saying that in that world, he looked like the freest person in the universe, transcending everything. Yeah, while being chained in the head by the hammer and nail. The more psychotic elements of Encore. But she doesn't say that last part. Sinclair refuses to believe this. Cromer didn't care whether he believed her or not. Dante noted the golden bar. It resonated with her cackle, then glowed brighter. Then she felt it begin. The final grudge would be fulfilled. Then a mass of flesh engulfed her lower half. Then countless appendages stretched outwards in countless numbers. Desire and madness made manifest. She had become a distortion that was a fusion of herself and the Pacatulum Luxuriae. Yes, I know, probably butchered the pronunciation. Well, an embodiment of lust. In her case, a lust for her twisted vision. She beckoned Sinclair to rip her up and chew her down. If he can. Then the fight continued. She was much stronger than before, but they somehow wore her down. Or at least they believed that, as she suddenly swiped at them, incapacitating them. Which wasn't helped by the fleshy hill, exuding a potent acid, which was melting the legs of the sinners. Sinclair, driven by hatred, crawled up to Cromer, who showed her sadomasochistic side, noting his rage, telling him to accept it, welcome it with open arms, watch her in her glorious body, closer to the purest form of humanity than ever before, unmatched strength of purity. Seriously? If that's your idea of purity, I'm up for impurity, as only a complete mad person would think that's okay in any way. She even believes that he can become like her too. Sorry to say this, but those who manifest EGO cannot distort. That's what was established in The Distortion Detective. Sinclair struggled to find the words. She then told him that he was scared all along. He lost his family, and he had to ride a bus with those strangers, forced to do things he didn't want. He knew in his heart that he didn't belong here, or rather, didn't belong there. didn't he want to run, to quit it all? Well, he didn't lose his parents. You killed them. He wouldn't be on that bus if it weren't for you running for... to kill his family and ruining his life. Sinclair was determined to complete his vengeance. Chroma told him to join her, not to avoid it, embrace it, complete her grudge. He continued towards Chroma. She told him to accept the pain. Only when suffering itself is transcended can we be reborn. Bloat the flesh, spill the blood, adding on the most human things each second to the purest world, where the impurities plaguing the city of all folks have been filtered out. What do you think he's doing? He's trying to filter you out. He thinks that you're a lunatic. He thought of his family and looked at those that were dead. They couldn't leave him like that. Dante telling him to listen to them. Yeah, I know, it's a bit late for the party, isn't it, Dante? They know that they think a lot. There's a lot going on in their head that they can't share with others. Dante knew that's how they were, worried that he might be a burden, constantly going over doubts and ruminations, which he never spoke of, guilt eating him from within. Sinclair admitted that his family died because of him, saying what he should have had. Chroma agreeing with him, telling him to embrace it. It's the way to become wholly reborn, to follow her and rest in her grip. Dante telling him not to listen to her, to look at her, observe her carefully. Their voice didn't reach him. His weapon dropping to the ground, he was unable to fight. It looks like they were well and truly... Even Dante's body was melting into the ground. They knew that they died trying to play the proper manager. Before they could tell Sinclair more, which included that Chroma was speaking a steaming pile of lies, threats, hypocrisy, and exaggeration. Even through their own pain, telling them again to look closely, not with his eyes, but with his heart. Only then would he see what matters most. Then Demian appeared repeating that. You said that when you see the things that matter most, you won't have to stifle yourself with shallow threats and cheap tricks, asking if it was right to Sinclair. He floated in between the two combatants, as if he was a member of the House of L, moving with grace, and as he floated in the air, lighter than it even, free from all worldly longings. An oppressive air seemed to accompany every step he took, and with a wave of his right arm, this Deus Ex Machina, Chroma's upper body vanished in a clean cut. Well, a good thing he's on their side. Whatever he is, he's clearly more powerful than a he-level distortion. After that, Sinclair... well, he was surprised by Demian's intervention. Demian told him that he changed his own fate. He's neither a coward nor a hero, but he's yet to let go of his fears completely. He said it before, when he fears someone. Sinclair completed that sentence. It was because you gave them the power to have control over you. Demian doesn't want anyone else to domineer over him. It's why he got rid of Chroma. Demian started to talk, taking airy steps as though embarking on a light trip. According to Demian, the world is about to head for a new birth, Only a few individuals can get there. Sinclair is apparently one of them. Sinclair fainted before he could answer. Then Demian slowly made his way over to Dante, telling them that Chroma attempted to become a god, like those which people in the past were said to believe in. Sinclair was but a stepping stone. In the end, one had to break an egg on their own. She put in quite a bit of effort doing this, and all that to create a throwback to the time when Sinclair lost his first coin, irregardless of the fact that Christmas was still a while away. The irony that they resorted to false imagery, something they loathe so deeply. Dante asked what he was talking about. Who was he? It was a pleasure for Demian to meet them, seeing them as the adults who will condition Sinclair at the moment. As for who he is, as for what he's talking about, they'll see in no time. Dante was confused by this. Demian told them. Sinclair took flight with unshakable faith in the power of the hearts. When he becomes one of the beautiful stars, that's when he'll return, telling them to take good care of Sinclair until then. Dante was surprised that he could hear them. Demian said that he could hear all sorts of chirps and thrills. It was only natural that he heard their voice. What matters most is something that could only just be seen or heard. Demian then disappeared. After that, the mounds began to melt away into a mixture of flesh and mud, which left a single golden bar appearing before them, spreading its warm light. Sinclair's world gradually melting into with the hills. Dante dragged what was left of their upper body across the floor to reach Sinclair. They were both still breathing. They believed that they could turn back the clock. They were still a manager and they should act like one, as they learned in their dying moments. They need to be a more sensible manager as well, needing to tell him. It might have been his fault, but it was one small mistake, one that anyone could make, to not beat themselves so much. They pat him on the back with their half-melted right arm. Sinclair didn't reply. Trying to identify someone to blame in all of this would be a never-ending endeavor. They all have the sins of the bus, their loss of head and memory. The involuntary appointment as the executive manager. At the root of all this, they might find no one but themselves to blame. Staying bound to that would only keep them from taking their next steps. Then the after team arrived and found Dante and the damned dozen, all horribly incapacitated. Dante understood. They must have figured that they'd been deep, and the after team was sent to scoop them up. They found Dante, asking if they should inject it, understanding that they can revive the others as long as they lived, ordering them to focus their resources on restoring their body. Dante was injected with a K-Corp HP bullet. They had 3 of these HP ampules, as they're otherwise known as. The after team asked if they should use all 3 of them. They were advised to use them at their discretion. Another mentioned that they were lucky strap hangers. Apparently the HP bullets or ampules were due to Virgilius having connections with a friend of K-Corp. Well, certainly enough connections to get those. Then Dante fainted and left consciousness. Sinclair, bawling lamentation, dimly rang through the emptiness. Their third mission was marked with a sober end in a dismal defeat, even though they retrieved the golden bar. although the bust was more vibrant than usual, all because they wanted to disregard the depressing outcome. Virgilius didn't seem to care that they got wiped, as the golden bar was with them. So he brought enough chicken kebabs for them to have one each, so if they didn't get theirs, figure it out. Honglu didn't know what the intention of skewering chicken meat with a stick was. Yi Sang was familiar with what this was. It was dakgokchi, which was South Korean street food, chicken with spices grilled on a skewer. Dakgokchi, sorry if I butchered the pronunciation, means chicken on skewers in Korean. Karan considered it a sweet smell, something that Mephi liked. Karan revved the engine and sung the tune that Dante could recognize this time. Yes, Silent Night, due to hearing it in car. Gregor pointed out that Christmas was still a ways off. Karan didn't give a telling him not to put a damper on her fun. If she feels like it's Christmas, that's all that matters. This annoyed Gregor, as she called him Bug Boy, even though he called her by her name this time. Radia suggested that he settle the score by calling her Busgirly. This further annoyed Gregor. Virgilius wasn't focused on this. He was more concerned by a bitter reminder of what led him to being the guide on this journey in the first place. The destruction of the orphanage that occurred over a year before. It was on Christmas Eve, and it involved Tomeri and Irori, the Purple Tear. It made him lose his appetite. Of course, Dante doesn't know this, as they went through the tunnel. Then they focused on Sinclair, who was awkwardly laughing amongst the others. Dante understood that if they were going through a long tunnel, they'd need to wait for the morning to arrive. Virgilius, of course, didn't know what they were talking about. Rodier was not taking their goofy poetry seriously, offering them a kebab. Misalt pointed out that they had no mouth, although I'll point out that they can scream. Ord is pointing out that they have no need for a mouth. They can command them without a word, telling the others to keep that in mind. Ishmael asking if she gets tired of licking their boots so clean. Finally! She says it specifically! Heathcliff asking if there was more of the skewer, as he seems to see it as peak. It seems that he's quite pleased with that. Ryosho telling BG to give her light. Gregor irritated by this, asking if she didn't think that he wouldn't know what that was for. Dante considered giving a speech to them about how fruitful yet unsuccessful how unsuccessful their mission was, changed their mindset, but considering that they told Sinclair not to let a failure of the moment bind him, they decided against that, and decided to make up for this less than ideal outcome on their next mission. Then Don Quixote was nervous around Virgilius, telling him that she had been acting with sufficient caution as he warned, and asked if she could have his skewer. He said, go right ahead. And this added to the layer of vigour to the already lively bus. The message was then spread between them. Then morning came, and the journey ahead continued. As for where this ties into the Divine Comedy, this is likely a reference to the eighth circle of hell, relating to fraud, an image of corruption, the disintegration of every social relationship, personal and public. As for the horned demons that whip the panderers and seducers, they're likely a referenced by those that had induced EGO corruption with mimicry, as they certainly have pointy teeth sticking out of them. The flames burning the soles on their feet. For sales of religious favors and offices. In reality, yes, that was one of the trials of the hammer and nail. As for the thieves being persecuted and bitten by snakes and lizards, that's likely referenced by the inquisitors that have EGO corruption that takes the form of snakes for arms. Now, District 11, at least from what we've seen in Core, appears to have a more Germanic theme, which would make sense considering that the author of the source material, and what Emile Sinclair is based on, is German. It's also revealed that, yes, K-Corp's singularity is medical nanotech. A chemical mixed with nanotech, to be more precise. That the HP bullets and possibly the SP bullets are made from. Yes, that which, the former certainly grants a temporary healing factor to those hit by it, although it didn't explain where the shield bullets came from. Either they provided the body with a temporary boost to resistances, they're from a different singularity, or those really are based around nanotech and the nanotech provided a shield. There are also bullets that slow down, and also bullets that destroy the body completely. Giovanni mentioned once that he was raised in an orphanage in the nest of District 11, and Roland described it as one of the better nests, and that's considering that District 9 has a nest that's a colourful light show, which he considered an eyesore. District 10 is a neon light show, and full of casinos, with an East Asian flavour to it. District 14 has more white buildings in its nest than a Mediterranean coastal town. Speaking of which, they're not above making deals to increase the demand of their singularity of HP bullets, so get rid of the alternative of prostheses, however you pronounce that, or full body cybernetic replacement, which of course HP bullets do not work on, and that demand picks up. So let the psychotic branch of N-Corp destroy those prosthetic factories and the town that makes them, and they'll solve the problem for you without it being traced back to you. District 11 is not as pleasant as it seems, is it, when you think about it that way? And then we have N-Corp. They've proven themselves to be the main threat to the plans of Limbus Company, threatening them in one form or another with every encounter. Yes, directly or indirectly. Known affiliates include Gubo, one with a history with Yi Sang, and one that's gotten in the way of Virgilius. Jia Huan, at the very least he's Honglu's half-brother. Herman, the winged remnant that was recruited by N-Corp, seeing her insanity as useful. And loosely, Sonia, the leader of the Eredivisie. Might be working with them, but he likely has his own agenda. N-Corp only trusts what they see, much like the Ring. Although N-Corp are humanitarians, which is expressed violently through their hammer and nail division. Yes, and they have the suicide vending machine, which is disturbingly popular from what has been heard of in Leviathan. Yes, and they have white buildings in their nest, as seen in Miss Salt's intro image, and how they're described in the Distortion Detective. In fact, Moses and Ezra, that world's version of Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson, have their fixer office based there. As for what they want to do with the Golden Bar, it's unlikely to be pleasant, or indeed abundant with sanity. As for what Demian is, all we can tell for certain is that he's stronger than a high-level distortion. He can swoop down to rescue Sinclair like he's Siegfried, and he has the mark that Sonia could see, that apparently only leaders have. If Dante could see it, then it means that they're improving. Now, Demian is either a sentient EGO in human form, a powerful EGO wielder with one that isn't obvious, or he's something completely different. Possibly one of these gods that Roland thought that he saw, but didn't have a clear memory of. As for the source material, this came from Demian, the story of Emile Sinclair's youth, where he was a boy raised in a middle-class home where he was dealing with the world of light, or illusion, struggling between this world and reality, where he's needing validation to feel meaningful, where in both cases, his family were symbols of safety, and Franz Kromer was a psychologically torturing bully that led Emile Sinclair to Max Demian. Sound familiar so far? In the end, in both cases, they both ended up in war, although with the Limbus Company version, it was much darker, as Kromer kills his family and let him live. Yes, I know that Kromer in this case is female, but that's irrelevant, at least compared to what she did at that point and what she would end up doing. As for Hermann Hesse, the author of this story, other than Hermann being the name of the scientist that ruined not just Gregor's life, it's a real-life reference to the author. Another reference to this is Karl. For example, that's a reference to the hometown of Hermann Hesse, located in southwest Germany, where every other year they hold the Karl Hermann Hesse Prize, honouring literary journals and translators focusing on his work. Right. That's the end of the Chapter 3 lore. Finally, we can move on. I've got some comparatively shorter subjects to cover before Chapter 4, or even Chapter 3.5. Until next time, hail the rabbit!